Today, September 29th, 2011. We're at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Joe Bruckner. I'm a volunteer with the History Center. And with me today is Tony Hilliard, who is also a volunteer at the Atlanta History Center. We're honored to have with us today John Douglas. John has kindly agreed to come in and tell us his story about his life, and particularly his military service and his service in Vietnam. Mr. Douglas, we sure appreciate you coming in, and we're honored to have you here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Would you tell us your complete name and your current address?
It's John Edward Douglas, Douglas with one S, Senior, and I currently reside in Alpharetta, Georgia, 30022.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, September 28, 1942, Crawford Long Hospital.
Okay. September 28th. Well, happy birthday a little bit late.
It was.
Tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
I grew up in the city of Atlanta. My dad was a fireman with the city of Atlanta. Most of the time was city fire inspector, and we lived down South Atlanta near the penitentiary. I went to Roosevelt High School, graduating there in 1960, and while at Roosevelt I was in the ROTC program for 3 years. During the time that I was in high school, I delivered papers for the Atlanta Journal for about 5 years. And when I graduated from high school, before going off to college, my first summer, those of you who are in the Atlanta area know about the Varsity restaurant, and I worked behind the counter at the Varsity before I went to college. Started North Georgia College, which is in Dahlonega, Georgia. It is a state school. It's a land-grant school, and it has the distinction of being one of the 6 essential military schools in the nation. It has the same status as the Citadel, VMI, Texas A&M, etc. I spent 4 years at North Georgia in the ROTC program. I was on military contract my last 2 years. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army upon graduation. I was fortunate enough to be a distinguished military student, distinguished military graduate, but I turned down a regular Army commission and took a reserve commission, which was unusual at that point. There were 2 or 3 reasons, but one of the prime ones that you might find interesting, the reason I turned down the regular Army commission was that in those days, at least, if you took a regular Army commission, you had to pay for your uniforms. If you were a reserve officer, you got a military uniform allowance. And I didn't have any money, and so that was one of the reasons that I turned down that commission.
Did you have relatives that had served in the military?
I had 2 uncles on my mother's side that were in the Navy, but nobody in the Army that I can recall.
Okay. How did your family feel about you going into the military, even though it was a reserve?
Well, it was wartime, and so the reserve status really didn't mean anything because I was going on active duty anyway. Yeah. But I think they were proud of the fact that I was serving the country, and they understood that it was something I had been training for, okay. Particularly during the 4 years at North Georgia.
Discuss your training, where you went, what you did, any experiences that you had that you'd like to share.
That's really an interesting story. I may be the only one that you'll ever come across with this. When I got the commission, I had requested the Transportation Corps, and the reason I did that, I had been around enough to know that through summer camps, etc., I really didn't want to walk. I wanted some kind of vehicle, and I figured Transportation Corps, if anybody was going to ride, it'd be the Transportation Corps. So I asked for TC. The year that I was commissioned, the Army tried out a new program. I believe it was designated a U2 program, and that meant that I went directly to a unit. I did not go to branch basic training. The Transportation Corps school was in Fort Eustis, Virginia, and I never went to Fort Eustis, Virginia. I was assigned straight to a unit at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I in turn took some of the courses that the 101st officers did, including a Pathfinder school and that type of thing as far as the combat training. And then I took a number of correspondence courses from the transportation school. And at some point, after 6 months, somebody certified that I was qualified to be a transportation officer, even though I'd already been one for 6 months at that point. When I first went to Fort Campbell, I was assigned to the 534th Medium Truck Company, and which I didn't even know what a medium truck was till I got there. That's the tractor-trailer trucks. And was assigned to that company within the 7th Transportation Battalion, and we supported the 101st Airborne as well as everything else on post at Fort Campbell. One of the first things that we did early on, I got there in July, and I guess it was by Labor Day, our unit, the 534th Transportation Company, was detached down to Fort Bragg to support a large exercise called Air Assault 2. The 82nd Airborne functioned as aggressors for the Air Assault group out of Fort Benning, which eventually became the 1st Air Cavalry. And so we spent about 3 months in the field down in and around Fort Bragg and that part of North Carolina.
And what year was this?
That was in actually the fall of 1964.
Okay.
Then in January of 65, I went to Organizational Maintenance Officer School at Fort Knox, Kentucky for about 2.5 months to, in theory, be trained to be the maintenance officer for a battalion, probably, because we had warrant officers that were the company maintenance officers. So I did that and finished that up about March of 1965. Came back to my unit at Fort Campbell and reassumed responsibility for my platoon, as well as I was the operations officer for the company. We had a and you'll have to forgive me for the date on this, I don't recall, but on sometime in that time period, we had I was the company pay officer, and on payroll day, at least in that era, you paid everybody in cash, and you had to go sign out the money, pay everybody, take the money back that might have been left over if somebody was not there, or etc., and turn in your report. And the troops had the rest of the day off to go pay their bills. So I finished that up, went over to the officers club at Fort Campbell, had lunch, walked out of the dining hall, and I noticed, easy to notice, a Major General Beverly Powell, who was the commander of the 101st Airborne and Fort Campbell, is running through the lobby of the officers club, jumps in his sedan, and his driver peels rubber out of the driveway at the officers club. And I thought to myself, you know, maybe as opposed to taking the day off, I might ought to go back over to the company area just to see what's going on. Went back over, and the division had been put on alert for the Dominican Republic incident that was going on, and we in turn, being the whole 7th Transportation Battalion, was put into action to support moving everybody to the airfield and get them ready. But as it turns out, one of the brigades of the 101st was actually on maneuvers down in Natchez Trace, and so all of the light truck companies, the 2.5s, had to go down there to pick up the brigade to bring them back, which left only our company, the medium truck company, to move all troops and supplies to the airfield. And and there was always units that were on immediate alert, and we already had some of them at the airfield, but we worked round the clock for the next 48 hours trying to get everybody situated. As it turns out, the 101st stood down, and the 82nd is the one that actually went to, 82nd Airborne is the one that actually went down to the Dominican Republic. But that led to late spring of '65, and at that point units were beginning to be put on orders to Vietnam. I had a new company commander. I'd had him about 6 months, I guess, Captain John Hall, that I enjoyed working with at the 534th, and he was immediately, once they started assigning units, they moved him to the 151st Transportation Company, which was a light truck company, the deuce and a half units, and he became the company commander over there. My best friend at that point was my next door neighbor, who was also a second lieutenant, Lieutenant James Clegg out of Louisiana, and he was reassigned to that outfit. So two of the people I was used to working with were gone, plus I had 4 or 5 classmates from North Georgia that were in the 101st that were on orders to go. And I don't know, my training of 3 years in high school ROTC and 4 years in college, it's like, dang, I think I'm gonna get left out on this thing. So I went into the colonel and volunteered to go, and was reassigned again to the 151 light truck company. And we spent about 60 days preparing the unit, and ended up loading up the trucks on rail cars, which was an interesting process, and shipped those out. Then had an opportunity to have a little bit of personal leave, and then we actually flew out of Fort Campbell on August the 16th of 1965, and to Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, put us on trucks, took us down, I mean on buses, excuse me, took us down to Oakland, and put us on a ship to Vietnam. It was my first cruise, if you will. Had some nicer ones later in personal life, but there were 5,000 guys put on the USNS Gordon, which was a military sea transport service ship. Looked like a Navy ship, painted like a Navy ship, but it was actually run by the separate service. And we left Oakland on the morning of August the 17th, 1965, and I stood up on top deck and thought, this is wonderful. We went through San Francisco Bay, out by Alcatraz, underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm thinking, man, I'm gonna love this. As soon as we hit the breakers on the outside in the Pacific, that ship started rolling and bouncing up and down, and I went downstairs and got in a bunk and took a couple of Dramamine and stayed in the bunk for 2 days before I felt like coming up. But the rest of the 17-day trip was pretty calm.
Describe the conditions on the ship and the morale of the troops.
The conditions on the ship were not great for enlisted. As an officer, I was in a cabin that had bunks for 21 individuals. I believe we had 20 second lieutenants that were in that particular cabin. Had one porthole, and there was no air to come in, and so somebody got very creative and found a cardboard box and stuck it in the hole to give us an air scoop to bring air in, which was great until they threw garbage overboard up above us, and we got garbage all over the place. But anyway, that was our cabin. We had to, as everyone else did, you were limited on taking your bath. It was, I guess, a traditional Navy bath in those days. You got in, you had 30 seconds so to turn on the water and get wet, turn it off, soap up, scrub, whatever you wanted, and turn it back on. Had another 30 seconds, 60 seconds to wash it off, and that was it. And you were allowed to have one of those showers once every 2 days. The men, when I'd go down to check on their conditions, they were in a large hole with bunks that were much higher. I've forgotten, probably 7 high or so in their living conditions were not great because they did not have airflow. That it certainly wasn't any air conditioning to keep things nice and cool. And I went down every day to inspect the area, and there was always a stench because somebody was seasick. And but surprisingly, the morale was much better than I had anticipated it being. These were good soldiers, and they knew what they had to go through and what was expected of them, and they held up real well. I was real proud of them. We ended up a 17-day trip. The only thing that was kind of interesting, we saw some flying fish along the way, and at one point a submarine surfaced off of our bow and went along with us for a while. I never was sure what that was about, but we ended up in a place called Queen Anne, and Queen Anne was my home for about 10 months, I guess. Queen Anne was one of the primary ports, but it was a shallow port. You could not pull the ships in, and so everybody had to be offloaded, the troops and the equipment, onto different landing craft. And so the morning that we went on to shore, just like the pictures of World War II, we went over the side and down the nets in full gear and put it into landing craft, and they took us into the beach. A couple of side notes about that was interesting. Our advance party, we had a Lieutenant Edward Uberti from Philadelphia, was one of our platoon leaders, and he was the advance party. Had a 3/4 ton truck and about 4 or 5 guys that were supposed to be our advance party. Well, we ended up in Vietnam and were there for 2 weeks before the advance party ever showed up. But that was not completely unheard of. I understand that kind of stuff went on with other units. But they took us out to a valley, Phu Valley, about 2 or 3 miles inland from Queen Anne, and then south a mile or so, and that's where the other transportation truck units were assigned for their company headquarters and their motor pools. And they found an area adjacent to one of those for us to set up, but we were in pup tents, and since the advance party was not there and we were not allowed to carry ammunition, we didn't have any ammunition. We got there, with the exception that I was the classified documents officer, and so even though I was not supposed to do it, I had a small handgun, a .22, that I'd put in the company safe, along with about 100 rounds, and we had that, and then we got a few rounds of ammunition and borrowed some weapons from one of the other companies for the first couple of nights for security purposes.
Would you describe where Queen Anne is geographically in Vietnam?
Sure. It is basically on the coast of central part of the country. The Highway 1 goes north and south, and it was about 2 or 3 miles inland from Queen Anne. The primary road which we ended up using was Highway 19, and Highway 19 would go from Queen Anne through the An Khê Pass into Pleiku. and it was basically the intersection of those two roads. And I'd like to show you a map
Okay.
of that. This is a map that illustrates the area that I'm referencing. This is the South China Sea, and then the Route 19. Route 19 goes from South China Sea up into the Central Highlands to An Khê, which eventually became the home of the first Air Cavalry that I'll talk about in a few minutes, and then on up into Pleiku.
Okay.
That was about 100 miles from Queen Yan to Pleiku, about halfway to An Khê.
Okay. Okay. What was your first impression of Vietnam when you landed?
It was hot. We had, I think it was 120 degrees when we first got there, and of course you're apprehensive about being there, and you've heard about things, and you've seen things, and you primarily you would hear about VC being in black pajamas. Well, P.S. everybody wears black pajamas, and so you were always scanning, you know, who are these people and what are they and why are they close to my truck, and etc. But those were the two things that stood out to me: the heat and not knowing really who the enemy was.
Yeah. Had you had the opportunity to talk to or be trained by many Vietnam veterans when you went over there?
No, we were very early in this. We were there got there in the summer of '65, and there wasn't a lot of folks who had been and come back. There were some advisors, but they had not. We'd not had the privilege of being briefed by them.
Well, tell us about your experiences in Vietnam, your responsibilities and what you did day to day, and some of the more memorable experiences that you had.
Well, again, it was highway transportation. We were running convoys, bringing supplies to various units, and we moved in various units. One of the first thing that happened while we were waiting for the trucks to be unloaded and everything, since I was the operations officer, I was selected to ride with one of the other units that had already been there for, well, I guess maybe 3-4 weeks at that point. So I went over to ride with a Lieutenant E.C. Burnett III out of Spartanburg, South Carolina, and he was with the 58th Transportation Company, which had even older 2.5-ton trucks than ours, which was hard to believe. But I rode on my first convoy with him. He had a driver, and he was up front. He had a machine gunner. We had all the Jeeps. We ended up making 30 caliber machine gun stands that went in the back, kind of like the Rat Patrol that you have seen on television or in the movies. So he had a driver himself and the machine gunner, and so I was the fourth person in the Jeep, sitting on the back. And as a precaution for landmines, the Jeep, as we all did, had sandbags all over it, and you would sit on sandbags and sandbags under your feet, etc., to lessen the chance of injury if you were to hit a mine on the highway. And as luck would have it, we hadn't been 2 or 3 miles and sand blew in my eye, and so it seemed like the whole rest of the time I'm squinting and pouring water trying to get my eye. So that was my very first experience, was going on convoy with this fellow, who ended up becoming a lifelong friend and retired as a justice of the Supreme Court of South Carolina. Once we got the trucks, then I in turn would brief the drivers and would take most of the convoys out. Occasionally we would combine them with other companies' vehicles, and so we would as opposed to having 50 truck convoys. We may have 200 trucks in convoys. And at that point, we would take turns from the officers from different companies of being up front and back, patrolling up and down the convoy, etc. The standard method, though, the trucks were generally loaded during the night, some during the day, but during the day, and a 24-hour operation off the beach clearance, and we would bring them back to the company motor pool, and then the next morning early we would form the convoys and go to An Khê and eventually to Pleiku. The first thing that we were really doing, and I remember the first time that, first several times that I went up to An Khê, they were preparing the area for the 1st Air Cavalry to move in, and I was literally had trucks riding behind the bulldozers as they would clear out an area, and they would clear out an area where we would in turn offload concertina wire, ammunition, food, things like that. So we had the privilege of seeing that whole area built, and it was kind of behind what was the airfield at An Khê, which was PSP airfield. Some of the things, though, that I remember when we would go from Quy Nhon to An Khê. It was about a 50-mile trip, and 45 of that was basically flat through rice paddies, and then the last 5 miles was up into the mountains. Well, on that flat part, there were 7 bridges that along Highway 19, all 7 had been blown up somewhere along the way, and the engineers had come in and put in bailey bridges, temporary bridges, so we could continue to use the highway. When we first got there, all the security for the area was on the highway was provided by the 101st Airborne, and we felt very, very comfortable with those guys since we've been with them at Fort Campbell. And I would say I was most impressed. Every bridge I would pull up to, there would be a couple troopers there that would pop to and salute and ask, you know, sir, how many vehicles do you have? I'll be glad to count them for you, and radio, etc. So we did that for, I'm not sure how many, maybe a month or two with the 101st. And then the 101st moved on, was the 1st Air Cav had moved in, and the first day I went on convoy with them being the security on the bridges. They were there. It was obvious it was not the same level that of trooper that had been with the 101st, but they were there. But about the 2nd or 3rd day I go up, I come to about the 3rd bridge and there's nobody there. And so I stopped the convoy to get out to go inspect the bridge to make sure, felt it was okay and safe to go across, and I find the bridge guards from the 1st Air Cav were swimming in the river with the local girls. So I would have to say I was not as impressed nor as confident about the level of support that I was getting from that unit. I apologize to any of you 1st Cav guys that may be seeing. We did have an incident one afternoon. We got a call that the Cav had been in was still in a very heavy battle. I believe it was the Idrang Valley stuff that was going on, and that they were running short ammunition and they needed ammunition. And the road, Highway 19, was generally safe, considered safe during the day, but not at night. So it was late in the afternoon, and I volunteered and took 30 trucks, and we went up with ammunition for them, but in turn we had to spend the night. Couldn't come back. So there had been it was a quartermaster outfit that was in An Khê that was supporting the 1st Cav that had been our next door neighbors at Fort Campbell, So it's not unusual. I'd go over and maybe have lunch with them, so I just went over to see if I could bunk in with them. And it was dark, it was pouring down rain, and I got out of the Jeep to go into their tent, and I had lost a lot of weight in that period of time. I'd lost probably 30 pounds because we didn't have any refrigeration the first 7 months that we were there. The only fresh food we had was basically at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Everything came out of a can. So that and the heat, I lost a bunch of weight. So I'd jump out of the Jeep, grab my bedroll, and go to run toward there, and my class ring from North Georgia just slips off my finger because it was wet. And I get my flashlight and I'm looking around for it and I can't find it. So I flip on the Jeep lights, at which point we're raked by machine gun fire from off the mountain. Because again, it was one of those things that it was our mountain during the day, it was their mountain at night. And so somebody just turn off the blankety blank Jeep lights, which we did. And in my era, I'd never been there at night, didn't realize that was part of their concerns. Next morning, I got out and with the help of 5 or 6 other guys looking for my ring. And where you would think it would be in the first 10, 15 feet, we looked and looked and we couldn't find it. And probably maybe 75 feet away, there was a garbage sump that they dug and had piled the dirt up this high, and somebody found it sitting right on top of the thing, or else it would have rolled on down the hill.
Gosh.
Anyway, that was a little on the personal side. The occasionally we in turn would run highways on up to Pleiku to support units up there. And at one point, again during one of the heavy battles, I was sent TDY to Pleiku and lived in the McVie compound and supported a transportation officer on the staff of 2 Corps headquarters in Pleiku. And that was quite different in that the mornings in the mountains were quite chilly, and first time I was actually wearing my jacket, and your mouth would condense in the morning when you go to speak. So it was a little different, but I spent about 3 weeks there. One other side note, at one point, again I've forgotten exactly, sometime in the fall, probably in October, I was asked to go on a investigation of an accident in Da Nang. What I failed to mention early on, when we first got to Vietnam and being a transportation unit, we were assigned to the only transportation headquarters that was available at that point, which was a stevedore outfit. And it was not a truck headquarters, it was a stevedore outfit that was completely responsible for unloading all the ships that would come into that area. Well, they had one Lark, which was an amphibious platoon, on TDY up to Da Nang, and one of the second lieutenants had wrecked a Jeep, and I was sent up to investigate that and fill out the proper paperwork, etc. So I landed at the Air Force Base in Da Nang, and remember, we've not had anything fresh to eat. They point me to the BOQ. I go and check in, which was a nice Quonset hut kind of thing, and the sergeant there said, well, Lieutenant, straight down the street here is the officers' mess. You know, feel free to go down there. So I walk into the Air Force mess hall, and their young chef there, complete with big chef hat on, says, "Welcome, Lieutenant. What would you like to eat tonight? We got some good fried chicken. We got some steak. Make sure you save some room now. I've got some homemade ice cream." So that probably should have been a 2 or 3 day tour. I managed to make it 4 days, I think, before I went back. But it was quite different. Also, while there, I had the opportunity, one of the, this Lark outfit, they broke down quite a bit, and so they had a civilian that was assigned from their manufacturing plant in St. Louis, as I recall. He was assigned to their unit, and at night he would get on the field phone and call and order supplies out of St. Louis to be shipped for repair parts. So I asked him, I said, "How do you do that? And how long does it take?" And he said, "Well, it'll vary. You know, if I'm lucky, I get it in a couple of hours. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 hours. But the deal is you use the crank phone." And then he gave me the names of all of the switchboards all the way to Saigon, of which there were 7. And you would say, you know, I need Rainbow, or I need, you know, whatever the next name was, down the coast. Well, if you would get down 3 or 4 and the line was busy, then they just cut you off and you had to start all over again. So that's the reason it would take so long. But he said, if you ever get to Saigon, then just ask for Clark Air Force Base, and once you get to Clark Air Force Base, I asked for the civilian operator. So I didn't have anything else to do, so I sat there and did this for about 2.5, 3 hours, and all of a sudden they answered Saigon. I asked for Clark, they connect me to Clark. I asked for the civilian operator, they connect me to civilian operator. I called collect to my parents' home where my wife was staying, and next thing I know, I am talking to my wife.
Wow.
From a field phone in Da Nang in 1965.
Was she surprised to hear from you?
Oh, she was very surprised. But that was one of only a few times we got to communicate, unlike what's happening currently with the guys in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah. Did you stay in this assignment for the duration of your tour?
I did. I was highway transportation officer with the 151 light truck company. I was promoted to first lieutenant along the way, and got my bars pinned on by Captain John Hall. Seemed like I continue to tell you more personal stories than others, but
well, that's important.
Those are the ones that come to mind and are better memories, I guess. This lieutenant that I mentioned from the 58th Trans that became a lifelong friend, E.C. Burnett, E.C. said, "Come on, go with me to Saigon. I've got, for Christmas, I've got my company commander to sign an administrative leave, and I'm going to go down there for 4 or 5 days." And I said, "Man, I can't do that. I've already been to Pleiku, I've been to Da Nang. Nobody else has been anywhere, and I don't think I can do that." And he said, no, come on. So I went to the first sergeant, had the first sergeant fill out the administrative leave and put it in the company commander's inbox without ever asking him or talking to him about it. Came back an hour later and he had signed it. So EC and I went over and got on a plane and we flew to Saigon. Did not know when we got there, we landed on the same day as the Bob Hope show. So we were privileged to go over to and stand actually at the end of the stage and watch the Bob Hope show. You'd see it on television. It was always, great, and it would last an hour, hour and a half or so. This was a 5-hour show, and he had Jerry Colonna and he had all the beautiful gals. He had can't remember all. Carol Baker, had Joey Heatherton, Nita Bryant. All it was a wonderful show, but about maybe 25 yards in front of the stage, they had a special reviewing stand set up for General Westmoreland, other senior military, Premier Key, who was the head of the country, was sitting there. And while Joey Heatherton was doing her act, she wore a kind of a majorette's outfit with boots, so forth. They allowed, she was a dancer, they allowed a few guys to come up to dance on the stage with them, and they'd give them 10 seconds or so to dance around, and then they'd move and bring the next one in. And some Spec 5 got up there that was way overweight with a dirty t-shirt on, and he didn't want to get off. He started chasing her around the stage, and they had to get the air police up there to, and I don't know whatever happened to him, but doing that right in front of General Westmoreland was not a good thing. But we got to see that, but then we didn't have a place to stay. We didn't know where we stay. We kept looking at BOQs. We looked at hotels downtown. Nothing. Everything was full. But somebody turned us on to a warrant officer that was maintaining a villa, and I use that term loosely. It was a house in out in a residential area that was, I'll say it was owned, I guess they leased by the aviation battalion of the officers of the aviation battalion of 1st Air Cavalry. And he said, yeah, I've got a couple of bunks, you know, you guys can come out with us. So he took us in the Jeep out to his villa, which was, again was just a house. But he had it set up pretty good. It was a wall around it, and had concertina wire, and he showed us all the Claymore mines, where to set those off, and where he had machine guns set up, etc. But we're not close to anything, and so he would take us by Jeep downtown, and he gave each of us a piece of paper with the address of the villa, and so just show this to a cab driver, and they would take you to the back out to the villa. So first night that worked okay. Maybe the second night it was okay, but it was about the third night, and we kind of knew where we were supposed to be going, but we handed this fellow the address, and we had been warned. They used to publish in the Army Times, they'd have a list of names of people killed as a result of hostile action and those killed as a result of non-hostile action. And some of those were wrecks and things like that. But quite often, these that are non-hostile actions had been the result of being robbed. And one of the favorite things that we were warned about was that if you were in a cab or in one of the pedicabs, that they would turn down a dark alley and there'd be a gang there to kill you and to keep your, obviously steal your money. So we were riding along, and all of a sudden this guy turns in a different direction, and we said, this isn't right. And so did he stop? He wouldn't stop. And he turned onto another darker street. And in those days, General Westmoreland would not allow you to carry weapons in Saigon if you were off duty, because he was trying to make it a safe city. So we had no weapons other than my pocket knife. And so, if I can dig it out here. So we pulled out my pocket knife and used it, putting it to his throat to get him to stop, because he would not stop. And so I've always carried one before, and I've carried one since.
How about that?
Usually to pick my fingernails, but that particular night it came in handy for another reason. Got him to back up and take us back where we're supposed to be.
Wow.
So
That was harrowing.
it was harrowing. It was harrowing. But the rest of the time there, it was just I guess on Christmas Day, we went, many people remember the Rex Hotel downtown in Saigon, and the Officers Club was up on top. We went up for lunch on, tried to get in for lunch on Christmas Day. The place was packed, but there was a Navy captain sitting over by himself, and he invited us over to join him for Christmas lunch. And he had a bottle of something, brandy or something, I think. I don't drink, but my buddy had a couple of drinks with him. But it was very enjoyable to have a nice Christmas lunch with some nice folks in Saigon.
You at some point prior to our starting the interview, you mentioned Ann Margret and your experiences with her.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I don't know, I was asked to be the escort officer in our area for USO tour, and the first two, first one was supposed to be Charlie McCarthy and Eggerberg and Charlie McCarthy, the puppet thing, and that got canceled a week beforehand. Then we had another one was supposed to be there, and Dean Jones, I think it was, and we had most everything done, and like 2 days before it was canceled, and I'd already set up all the stages and arranged for everything. So one day I had a note to go see the colonel, and I went to see the colonel, and he said, I know you've already had 2 bad experiences, but I want to give you the first option on this. The Ann Margret's supposed to be coming. Would you like to be her escort officer? And it took me about a half a millisecond to say, yes, sir, I think I'll handle that. So I had the opportunity to be with her for a couple of days in and around the Queen Yan area, and she is wonderful. She was just as pleasant, and never wanted to leave the hospital. She always wanted to sign more autographs, and to I've got a picture here somewhere that I'm going to show you of her. Here we go. This is actually got 2 pictures. One when she first arrived at the airport in Queen Yan, and she's standing there with myself and with Colonel Goodell, who was the commanding officer of the 27th Transportation Battalion. By then, we had moved from the stevedore command to a truck company battalion headquarters, and he was there with me to meet her. This is a picture of her in one of her outfits. We arranged, we had a dining hall that had just been built for the company, and we had her come over and cut the ribbon and have a meal with us. And we had a number of, it was a kind of a competition amongst the men to be able to sit with her at the dinner. But she was wonderful. She still is wonderful. I had the opportunity to meet her again just about 6-7 years ago when she came to Atlanta, down at the fabulous Fox Theater. Shared with her some of the pictures that we had taken and reminisced about stuff, and she is. It was one of those moments. We were behind stage, and there was some other people standing around, but I was trying to tell her that how much I appreciated her coming, that I was not the first, nor would I be the last GI to ever thank her for coming, and what it meant to have her there. And I got about halfway through with it, and I just lost it. I just started crying. She just came over and hugged me and whispered in my ear about how glad she was I'd made it home and stuff. She's quite a lady. And,
well, I'm sure that meant a lot to her for you to tell her that too.
Yeah, she was something else. She's great. She was great.
Good. When you were running the convoys, did you ever have any enemy contact?
Fortunately, the contact that I had, which was some, was primarily sniper fire. I was never personally leading a convoy that was in an ambush, but it was not unusual to find holes in the side of the truck, and even some of the tanker trucks we had, you'd pull up and there'd be fuel pouring out the side of them. Fortunately, they didn't explode when they must not have had tracer rounds or something that would have caused that.
Yeah.
But in fact, we had, I think I mentioned earlier, the beach and where we were, company headquarters was 2 miles this way, going east, going west, and then about a mile south. Well, on that 2-3 mile area, it was again basically through rice paddies, but there was some hills over to the side that were 200-300 yards away, and it was not unusual at all to see you shot at during the night, because the tracer rounds would come right in front of you. Yeah. And all of the officers in the battalion, we decided we were not going to try to go find the guy, because he was obviously a very bad shot, and he'd never hit anybody. Again, he'd hit the trucks, or he'd hit the Jeep, but I was fortunate in that I did not have to have that type of encounter.
You've briefly spoken about some contact with civilians. Are there any other experiences you had with civilians that were particularly memorable?
Most of the civilian contacts that we had, they were very nice people. They were, we were living close to this little village. We had a young lady that came in to our officer's tent and would clean up and would do our laundry. She was sweet as could be. She was cross-eyed, and she was flat-footed. In fact, she would ride her bicycle, and she could actually wrap her toes around the pedal if she would pedal. But very, very nice. And she'd do our laundry. But the laundry was all done in the rice paddy water, and so she would wash them, and she would use the old iron that put on the coals and then press it, and she'd bring them back, and it looked nice until you put them on and start sweating a little bit. They would really stink. But most of the contact there, and we visited with different people when we were in Saigon, just in and out of shops. They were very nice people. Never really had any kind of negative encounter. We had a fire one day close by, and my sergeant and I went over and actually put out the fire, saved their little shack kind of stuff, and they were most appreciative. That's about the only civilian contact we had.
Before you,
if I might, let me go back and mention a couple of other things, though, that I told you we moved in the 1st Air Cavalry, but we also had the opportunity to move in other units, and one of the first things we did was, because just like us, everybody would get off the ship and not knowing what to expect, and they'd bring them in over the side and, think they're heading Normandy or something, and so we had a big sign made that welcome to Red Beach. This beach taken and secured by 27th Transportation Battalion truck for your security. But we'd pick them up and move them in. So we also had the opportunity to move in the 22nd Tiger Division from Korea, and we moved in the 25th Division when they first came to country. A couple of side notes again about those. The Korean Tiger Division, they would weekly they would publish a list of enemy captured and enemy killed by each unit, and there'd be some in each, except the Tiger Division. The Tiger Division always was killed. There was never any captured. But they had been, they were in, I guess they're about a mile and a half from us as far as their division headquarters, and after about a month and a half we had a call from they had actually, their commander went to see the general in charge of the area and complained, because we being the U.S. Army, had furnished them all of their supplies. We furnished them their tent, we furnished them their food, we furnished furnished them all their stoves and everything for their mess. Well, somewhere along the way, nobody ever trained their cooks on how to use our food or how to use our stoves. And so they were just opening big cans and putting it all together, and they were, you know, putting peaches in with, you know, asparagus or whatever, and they were getting slop. And so the solution was that they took all their cooks and assigned them to all the various units around to work with our cooks to learn how to use the stoves and learn how to do the menus, etc. And as a during the interim, they were just given sea rations to eat, and they were with us for a week or two, and kind of got them trained. The 25th Division, there's another story. Their advance party came in and were bivouacked up Highway 19, just about 4 or 5 miles up from intersection of Highway 1, which again, that was supposed to be unsecured area. But Lieutenant Clegg from the Louisiana that I mentioned was a good friend of mine. He and I were working together that particular night when we got word that they were ready to offload all of the 25th Division, begin offloading of the 25th Division stuff. And we needed to get the 25th Division to come down to pick up their stuff. They had about 25 or 30 trucks, deuce and a half, that had already been unloaded. And so this is late at night, 11 o'clock or so. We find our way up the dark highway, find their bivouac area, find their officers, and get their trucks to follow us back into Queen Yan to the beach to be unloaded. And I normally carried a 45 was all I carried with me, because normally we had a machine gun and so forth on the Jeep. But Lieutenant Clegg, who is now a retired minister in Florida, Baptist preacher, he carried an M14, a 45, and an N79 grenade launcher with him wherever he went. He was prepared. He outranked me, data ranked, by about 2 months, because he went on active duty before I did. And so I'm driving, he's sitting next to me. His weapons are all sitting there in the center. And we're bringing this convoy in. And it's pitch black dark. And we round a curve, and the whole highway is covered with people in black pajamas, yelling, screaming, waving. And so I stop, and these guys with the 25th are not regular transportation guys. They don't know about convoy discipline. They don't know about leaving distance between vehicles, so that one grenade would blow up a whole bunch of trucks. So they just pulled up nose to tail. And so this is a personal thing my wife and I laugh about all the time, but I reach over and pick up his gun and say, go check it out and I'll cover you. And so he walks down the highway, and it turns out there was a South Vietnamese officer in his Jeep, and his driver had rounded a curve and rolled over and went down way too fast, and it rolled down a hill. So, and I guess his gunner as well. So we ended up having to pick up 3 of them and put them on the trucks and take them down to that kind of thing. But anyway, it was the primary duties that we had there were line haul stuff and beach clearance and moving in these various duties. The last 3 weeks in country, we moved to Cameron Bay, we being our unit. And they took us down by sea with the big, I forget the designation of all those, LST or what, but it was a big ship where the front would come down, you could drive on and off. That's right. So we get there, and we've been nursing the clutches on these old deuce and a halves for the whole year we'd been there. And we start to offload them, and out of 60 trucks, we tore up 16 clutches just trying to get across the beach up onto the PSP. So once we got everything squared away, they said, well, look, we have been, you guys have got line haul combat experience. All we've been doing is offloading these ships here for 2 years at Cameron Bay and storing stuff. The only thing that's ever gone out is either back by sea, by LSTs or other landing craft, or by air. We've never taken anything out by truck. And so, since you've got experience, we're going to let you start taking this stuff out. So again, I'm the operations officer. I'm the first one to take a convoy. And we're again attached to a stevedore outfit, because they primarily run the port at Cameron Bay. So I go down and meet with the major who is their operations officer, and he said, I got 25 truckloads I want you to take up to Nha Trang, which is about 25, 30 miles north. And I said, well, how do I get there? And he said, well, according to the map, you go across the bridge, hit Highway 1, turn right, go up about 25, 30 miles. He said, the only time I've ever been there, I've gone by helicopter. So we don't use that highway, but you can, that's where it's supposed to be. Just go to the McAfee compound up there, and they'll tell you where to offload the trucks. I said, okay. Who do I call if I have a problem? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm used to, if I have an issue, I pick up the radio, and either the 101st or the 1st Air Cav has come and helped me whenever I've had an issue. He said, well, I don't know. I guess you could call me. And said, okay. So we go to check the radios, and the radios don't even match. We can't even get the frequencies to match. So I take convoys a couple of days north to Nha Trang, and then we take convoys south to Phang Rang. And at that point, he said, the colonel says he wants you to carry more stuff, wants you to use your trailers. So, well, sir, you know, we're not supposed to use the trailers in combat situations. Well, yeah, I know, but you can carry more stuff. The colonel wants you to use the trailer. So we go down, come back. Next day we go down, all of the little village you go through, all the family altars were out beside the road in protest for us coming through. We didn't know it. Didn't know it till afterwards. You know, why are these things here? And we met a South Vietnamese convoy going the other way, and so we were having to kind of weave our way in and around with trailers through these, which these guys are not used to pulling, through the family altars. And turn around, and when we came back, the 101st Airborne was at Phang Rang, the reason we were taking supplies down to them. But on the way back, same thing happened. We were in and around all these family altars. Well, a couple of days later, come to find out that it was actually an article in the Army Times that they were protesting us coming through with little trucks. And the reason they put their family altars out there, and if we'd hit one of them, it'd probably been some kind of major incident before, so we didn't do that. So after that experience, I was about a week before I was supposed to come home. I just went into the company commander and I said, you know, I think I'm going to go home. And because I explained, you know, I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't have anybody to call. You know, the radios don't match. I just don't feel comfortable. So he said, well, I'll see about getting you some orders. And I said, no, I took care of that before we left Queen Yan. I had a little foresight and had somebody cut me some orders. So I got on the plane and hit Saigon and went to check out. And Sergeant says, yeah, here a couple of days early, aren't you, Lieutenant? And I said, well, maybe just a couple. He said, well, I can't get you out today, but if just stay in the BOQ, give me a couple of days and I'll get you out. So I hung around a couple of days and came on home. And that was got back here basically 1st of July or so of 1966. And remember it had been 120 degrees when we first got there. Well, I'm back here and it's 90-something degrees. My wife had gotten us a new apartment out near Belvedere Plaza off of Memorial Drive. Nice apartment, a little one-bedroom thing, air conditioned. And I was freezing at 90 degrees because I was used to being so much more. I mean, I went to bed, I pulled blankets over me, and she was sitting out on the back steps trying to cool off because I turned the air conditioner off. And went to church that Sunday and wore my heaviest wool suit. But it took, again, maybe a week and a half or so to begin to acclimatize myself back to it. But that's most of the stuff. What else can I tell you? What else you want?
Well, tell us a little bit about your life after you got out of the military.
Well, I've been very fortunate. I've had a blessed life. Came back, and initially I worked for the Georgia Power Company in the Industrial Relations Department, and went back to school at Georgia State at night and got my Master's in Business degree. So I got an MBA on the GI Bill with using night school. Then I went to work for Rich's Department Store, which was a large retail store in the South. In fact, it was the largest at one point. And I did several things with them. Started off in their personnel department, and which was the term in those days before human resources. And I became the corporate personnel manager. I ended up being moving into store management, was assistant store manager of the downtown store, was assistant to the senior vice president over all stores for all operations, was the operating manager of the Lenox Square store. And then my last few years with them, I was vice president of credit and customer service. Rich's, or actually Federated Department Stores, was bought out, and they were wanting to move the credit operation to Ohio, and I had no interest in going to Ohio, and so I left and went with Citizens and Southern Bank, CNS Bank, which is a large regional bank at that point, running his credit card operation. We merged with the Sovereign Bank of Virginia, S-O-V-R-E-N, Sovereign. And I moved to Norfolk, Virginia as president of the CNS Sovereign Credit Card Bank, which was one of the 10 largest credit card banks in the country at that point. We in turn were bought out after a couple of years by North Carolina National Bank to form Nations Bank, and I could have stayed if I wanted to, but I could tell I wasn't going to like the culture coming out of that organization. So MasterCard offered me the job to run the southern United States for them. So I did that for a number of years, had to 15 states, plus launched their purchasing card, which was a new product. Plus I was responsible for our sponsorship of World Cup soccer in 1994. But I was traveling 80% of the time, and I decided that was probably just wearing on me too much, and so I left and went with a company here called the American Security Group as executive vice president over product development and so forth. Then I thought I was really going to retire around 2000 and went into executive recruiting. Had a great year, and then 9/11 happened, and the executive recruiting business just went away. So I worked in the financial services arena again at one point. Was the general manager of a prepaid credit card product for a couple of years. But the last 4 years I have been associated back with North Georgia College. It's now North Georgia College and State University. They'd never had an MBA program, a master's program, and they wanted to start one, so I ended up being the actual title was Director of MBA Marketing and Development. There was no MBA director though, so I de facto did that. And I did that for 4 years and just finished that up just a few months ago. But as one of my buddies already told me, John, you failed at retirement, so I'm sure I will find something else to occupy my time. But I do a lot of volunteer work and enjoy my opportunity to be through the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association to work with Tony and others down at the USO at the airport. We volunteer as ushers at the Fox Theater. I am very active in a large church choir, and we got 7 grandkids. So
congratulations.
Staying busy, and my wife 2 years ago gave me a Harley, and so I ride my Harley as much as I can. What other questions you got for me?
Well, before we wrap up, I want to ask Tony if he has any questions.
No.
And I want to give you one more opportunity just to say anything you want to say, either to fill in any blanks that you want to fill in or deliver any message to people that will view this in the immediate future or down the road.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to put something like this for hopefully grandkids or great-grandkids or somebody along the way might understand what was going on. The Vietnam conflict was a tough time. It was a tough time for everybody. I think most of us that were there felt that we were making a difference. We also felt that our hands were tied in a lot of areas and did not have the opportunity to really fight that war to the successful conclusion that we had all hoped that it would have, and that we have seen the U.S. do in other wars. But I still feel very positive about it. I feel that it was something that was necessary. I personally did not suffer some of the indignities that some of the other guys did when they came home later, because I was so early getting back. But it's good to be able to reminisce about some of this stuff. And I'm sure there's many other things. I apologize to those who really wanted to hear more about the duty. I probably ended up telling more personal stories than the duty side, but some of that stuff I'd just rather not get into.
Well, you had a very interesting tour of Vietnam, and you played a big role in protecting the troops, getting supplies to them and moving them, and you put yourself in harm's way quite a bit based on what I just heard you say. And you've also had a very productive career subsequent to the military.
I've had a blessed life. I really have. Had mentioned that while I was at North Georgia as a freshman, I met the lady that became my wife, Betty Little, from Livonia, Georgia. We've now been married 47 plus years, and so we've just really been blessed.
Well, I'd say that's your #1 accomplishment.
Amen.
Well, thank you again so much, and we're really honored to have had the opportunity to be with you and hear your experiences, and just want to thank you for what you've done for our country.
You're welcome. Thank you. Appreciate you guys doing this.